Greetings. Today we'll talk about avoiding the second death. Now Jesus makes a promise about avoiding the second death in Revelation 2 verse 11. Jesus writes, "He who overcomes shall not be hurt by the second death." If you ask most people about this, they would not want to be hurt by the second death, even though they might not know what the second death is. Obviously, no one ever wants to be hurt by anything, right? So we should learn what the second death is all about. Jesus has many verses in the Bible to help us learn about this second death. Revelation 20, verse 14. Death, meaning dying, you have to be alive in order for death to cause you, and you end up dying and be dead. And Hades. Hades is another word for grave. So death and Hades were cast into the lake of fire. Revelation 20 verse 14 says, "This is the second death." Revelation 20 verse 15, anyone not found in the book of life was cast into this lake of fire, second death. Jesus is pointing out that some people will die a second time by the lake of fire called the second death. Jesus then explains the kind of people who will face this lake of fire. Revelation 21 verse 8, the unbelieving, the abominable, the murderers, the sorcerers, idolaters shall have their part in the lake which burns with fire, which is the second death. So he keeps explaining this second death concept. Many might assume that the lake of fire is another way of saying daily burning in hell. But God shows that the second death, the lake of fire second death, only happens on one day. And so we look at this, we have 1 day second death. So it's not a long continuous thing, it happens on 1 day. Most Bible readers are being taught that going to hell fire occurs at death and then continues in a place called hell forever and ever and ever. Jesus teaches differently, and he teaches that the second death is the moment when the enemies of Jesus die during an attack on the camp of the saints. And what's all that all about? Truth seekers should be asking, when will this 1 day occur? Well, we're told that in Revelation 20 verse 9 gives us that answer. In verse 7, when the 1,000 years have expired of peace and prosperity on earth, Satan the devil is released from his prison. After Jesus rules all nations for this 1,000 safe happy years, God then allows Satan out of prison. Verse 8, and he will go out to deceive the nations which are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, and that's the Battle of Armageddon. Gog and Magog are Bible terms for the enemies of God. Next comes verse 9, showing the day in which all the enemies of God are destroyed by fire. Revelation 20 verse 9, and they went up and surrounded the camp of the saints, that beloved city, that's Jerusalem, right? And fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. This is the 1 day, the second death day, when all humans who are enemies of Jesus are destroyed by the lake of fire. So this final battle attack against God's people is the last day for humans to live on planet Earth, and after that they'll be dead forevermore. It's the second death. Verse 14, then death and Hades were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. Verse 15, and anyone that's humans, not found written in the book of life, was cast into the lake of fire. Therefore, there's no more humans, right? And therefore, there's no more death, and therefore, there's no more grave, right? So, what we've learned in Revelation is only a very short version of the 1 day second death. It was just basically verse 9, they surrounded the camp of the saints, the beloved city, and fire came down from heaven and devoured them. That's a very short verse. But there's a long version. The second death has a longer version in a different place in the Bible. Thousands of years ago, Jesus gave the prophet Ezekiel a whole chapter describing the final last day for rebellious human beings. In the last 3 verses of chapter 38, God shows a full description of the lake of fire, second death, day of destruction. Ezekiel 38:21. And I will call for a sword against Gog throughout all my mountains, the mountains of Israel, says the Lord. Every man's sword will be against his brother. So, and God has done this in the past. He's caused a panic in the troops, and they get disoriented, and they start killing their buddy next to them. They start killing their own troops who are supposed to be fighting the enemy. They end up fighting each other and killing each other. God's done it. You can find it in the Bible. He's caused that to happen many times before. In Ezekiel 38:22, and I will bring him to judgment with pestilence and bloodshed, and I will rain down on him and on his troops flooding rain. Every now and then you see flooding rain. It's not fun, right? Great hailstones, fire, and brimstone. So this is the longer version. Bottom line is God's enemies will die horrible deaths on the day of the second death. In Revelation, we only see that fire came down from heaven. In Ezekiel 38, God paints the whole picture of the second death day. God begins this second death chapter with Ezekiel 38, verse 1. Now the word of the Lord came to me, saying, verse 2, Son of man, set your face against Gog and the land of Magog. Verse 8, after many days, you will be visited. In the latter years you will come into the land, the mountains of Israel. Verse 9, you will ascend, coming like a storm, covering the land, a cloud, and you and all your troops and many peoples with you. Verse 11, you will say, I will go up against the land of unwalled villages, and I will go to the peaceful people who dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates. They're not afraid of being attacked, and so they live peaceably. They don't have to have all these bars and gates and walls and so on. Verse 12, to take plunder, to take booty, to stretch out your hand against the people gathered from the nations who have acquired livestock and goods and dwell in the midst of the land. So it's almost like a pirate story. They've decided these other people are living so well, and they've got livestock and everything, let's go and plunder them. Verse 13, have you come to take plunder? Have you gathered your army to take booty, to carry away silver and gold, to take away livestock and goods, to take great plunder? Verse 15, then you will come from your place, you and many peoples with you, all of them riding on horses, a great company, a mighty army. And it will be in the latter days that I will bring you against my land, says God. This is God talking through Ezekiel, so that the nations may know me. This is Jesus. They're going to know me by what I do to Gog, right, on this last second death day. And when I am hallowed or respected in you, O Gog, before their eyes, because of what God did to Gog in this day. God shows enormous power when he wants to get people's attention. He's done it throughout Bible history. He's going to do it again. The Battle of Armageddon, he's going to do it on this final second death day. 40 years before the walls of Jericho fell down flat, the people of Jericho saw God's great powers when he destroyed the Egyptian empire. 40 years afterwards, and after the Red Sea miracle, Rahab in Jericho said this. It's recorded in the Bible. The Lord your God, he is God, God in heaven above and on the earth beneath. Rahab knew, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the God of the Israelites was the God of the universe. It was not a doubt in her mind. You could see, how could she be so certain? You know, she was from Jericho. She lived in Jericho. She wasn't an Israelite. She wasn't out there in the wilderness with them for 40 years. She just knew, right, from the data she could gather. How could she be so certain that she would bet her life and the life of her loved ones on that belief? That's how strong her belief was. Now, twice she faced death by holding tight to that certainty that Israel's God was all-powerful. And she wanted to make a deal with this all-powerful God. Now, her king, the king of Jericho, could have killed her, or the Israelites could have killed her, and were planning to, except she made a deal. Here are her words recorded for all to see in the greatest book ever written, the Bible. Joshua 2:10. We have heard how the Lord dried up the waters of the Red Sea when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings whom you utterly destroyed. Verse 11. As soon as we heard these things, our hearts melted. Neither did there remain any more courage in anyone because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. Now the Godhead is known to the nations by the great power he uses against his enemies. And that's why in future days God is going to use great power. And then he's going to reference that great power and say, this is who I am the one who exercises this great power. So Ezekiel 38 is a 3,000-year warning to all all those who choose to be enemies of God, right? It's like, well, I don't believe in God, or I hate God, or I'm not going to serve God. If you choose to be an enemy of God, this is a warning, right? It's also an invitation to every human to examine the evidences of history, to examine and study prophecy and see how God uses his power to show humans who he is. I mean, Superman, in the old days of watching Superman on TV, Superman was almost all-powerful except for kryptonite. Well, God, who created the universe, is totally all-powerful, and we need to learn and respect that. So if you take the time to read Ezekiel 38, you will see how wound up Jesus gets on this topic. It's just a great chapter, chapter 38. We're in verse 18. When God comes against the land of Israel, says the Lord God, that my fury will show in my face. That's a pretty good description of how angry he's going to be. Verse 19, in my jealousy, says Jesus, and in the fire of my wrath. Right? If you've ever upset your mother and got her fiery, wrathful, you kind of know the feeling here. I have spoken, surely in that day there will be a great earthquake in the land of Israel. Verse 20, so that the fish of the sea, this is a pretty big earthquake, because of the fish of the sea, the birds in the heavens, the beasts of the fields, all the creeping things that creep on the earth, and all men who are on the face of the earth shall shake in my presence, says God. The mountains shall be thrown down, the steep places will fall, every wall that man has built anywhere, everywhere, shall fall to the ground. This is going to be a massive, unbelievable earthquake that will get everybody's attention, and Jesus is doing this to get their attention. Verse 21, I will call for a sword against Gog throughout all my mountains, says the Lord God. Every man's sword shall be against his brother. Verse 22, and again, I'm going to repeat this to ensure what God is saying different from what he said in Revelation. He said, I will bring him into judgment with pestilence, with bloodshed, with flooding rain, with hailstones, with fire, with brimstone. If you suffer any one of those all by themselves, or all of those put together, you are going to know you have suffered. Verse 23, thus, by these things, I will magnify myself and sanctify myself, and I will be known in the eyes of many nations. Then they shall know that I am the Lord. This is God's way of showing his power, of dealing with the rebellious people, of causing the second death on that final day. And this second death day is a warning to all humans about respecting God and not being rebellious against God. Every human will have a clear choice to either serve God faithfully or to become an enemy of God. Those who love and serve God will live in glorified bodies, we're told that in 1 Corinthians, and enjoy family of God's status for all eternity. And as humans, we can't really comprehend what that is. There's a few descriptions in the Bible, but we struggle to grasp what an awesome thing that is. Those who are rebellious and hate God will go out of existence on that fateful day known as the second death day.